She met him during a season when stability felt rare and promises sounded unusually sincere. He listened carefully, remembered small details, and made ordinary days feel intentionally chosen. Trust grew quietly through routines, shared jokes, and plans discussed without urgency or pressure. Friends saw kindness, consistency, and patience, nothing resembling danger or hidden calculation. She believed love could be steady, practical, and protective rather than dramatic or consuming. Even disagreements ended softly, framed as teamwork instead of battles needing winners. He spoke about the future with calm certainty, presenting safety as the ultimate devotion. She relaxed into that vision, letting defenses lower and independence gradually intertwine. There were moments of unease, brief silences she dismissed as stress or misunderstanding. She chose belief repeatedly, because nothing visible suggested the cost would be fatal. Marriage formalized what already felt settled, a partnership presented as mutual and respectful. He encouraged her ambitions, praised her intelligence, and celebrated her professional discipline. She thrived under that support, trusting it was genuine rather than strategically convenient. Finances merged, decisions centralized, and compromises framed as efficient rather than restrictive. She mistook his need for control as concern, his questions as interest, his rules as care. Privacy thinned slowly, boundaries softened, and autonomy surrendered without immediate consequences. Love became predictable, comfortable, and quietly conditional in ways she barely noticed. When doubts surfaced, he offered reassurance polished enough to erase them. She wanted permanence, not suspicion, and chose harmony over investigation. The home felt safe, which made vigilance seem unnecessary and even ungrateful. The shift did not announce itself loudly. It arrived disguised as practicality and protection. He handled paperwork, schedules, and negotiations, insisting efficiency prevented future problems. She appreciated the relief, unaware of how dependence was being carefully engineered. Decisions began ending before discussion fully started, guided by his confident conclusions. Small objections were met with disappointment, teaching her silence was easier. Love narrowed into expectations, subtly redefining loyalty as compliance rather than partnership. She rationalized discomfort, telling herself relationships require adjustment and patience. Outside voices faded as life became centered tightly around shared obligations. He remained charming publicly, reinforcing her belief that concerns were internal. What felt like peace was actually the absence of resistance he quietly cultivated. On the night everything fractured, nothing dramatic signaled danger or irreversible intent. Conversation stayed ordinary, routine gestures exchanged, and assumptions carried them forward. She trusted familiarity more than instinct, believing love prevents unforgivable harm. Betrayal does not always arrive as rage. Sometimes it comes calmly prepared. When reality finally surfaced, comprehension lagged behind shock and disbelief. The person she loved revealed himself through action rather than confession. Control completed its design, leaving no space for negotiation or escape. In that moment, love transformed into the mechanism that enabled her destruction. She understood too late that devotion had been weaponized against her. The life she trusted ended quietly, without witnesses to name the truth. The aftermath unfolded without her presence, shaped entirely by narratives she could no longer correct. He spoke softly to authorities, expressing shock measured enough to sound believable. Grief was performed carefully, calibrated to appear devastated yet composed. Details were offered selectively, framed to minimize curiosity and redirect conclusions. He understood systems well enough to know which truths mattered and which disappeared. Sympathy gathered around him quickly, insulating questions before they could fully form. Her absence became a vacuum, others filled with assumptions convenient to him. Documents aligned, timelines settled, and responsibility dissolved into ambiguity. What looked like tragedy began transforming into closure for everyone else. Justice drifted away quietly, mistaken for resolution rather than avoidance. Memories were revised in conversations she could no longer interrupt or challenge. Small arguments were exaggerated, private moments reinterpreted as instability. Her independence was recast as unpredictability, her confidence as emotional distance. People nodded, accepting explanations that fit comfortably within familiar stereotypes. No one suspected calculation because pain appeared genuine on his face. He mourned publicly while benefiting privately from her disappearance. Accounts transferred, policies activated, and obligations resolved efficiently. Her life was reduced to assets, timelines, and softened recollections. Love stories rewritten always favor the survivor when silence answers back. The truth required her voice, and her voice was gone. What followed was not chaos, but disturbing normality that confirmed his success. Days resumed rhythm, routines stabilized, and concern gradually faded. He returned to work, social gatherings, and familiar habits without resistance. Condolences thinned as novelty disappeared, replaced by quiet acceptance. Her name was spoken less frequently, then cautiously avoided. The world moved forward with alarming speed, indifferent to unresolved injustice. Nothing external demanded reevaluation or accountability. Systems performed exactly as designed, protecting appearance over substance. What remained unchallenged became officially settled. Her ending was processed, archived, and forgotten. Yet within that silence, something refused to dissolve completely. Stories never fully end when motives remain unexamined. Details ignored still existed, waiting without urgency. What looked finished only appeared that way from the surface. Consequences delayed are not consequences denied. Time does not erase imbalance, it preserves it quietly. Beneath closure, unresolved tension remained stored like pressure. Her story paused, not concluded, suspended beyond ordinary timelines. The world believed she was gone entirely. That assumption would eventually become their mistake. The truth began emerging far from where her life had officially ended. Records surfaced inconsistently, fragments overlooked because they seemed insignificant alone. A misfiled document, a delayed notification, a signature that never fully aligned. None of it mattered to anyone until patterns started quietly forming. Systems are precise, but only when someone is watching closely. In places where oversight thins, errors accumulate patiently. What protected him depended entirely on indifference remaining intact. The moment attention shifted, stability weakened. Nothing supernatural occurred, only administrative cracks widening naturally. Her story found an opening through process, not fate. She regained awareness gradually, not as rebirth, but as continuation interrupted. Pain registered first, then orientation, then the awareness of survival. Confusion followed relief, quickly replaced by clarity sharpened by memory. She understood instantly that survival alone changed nothing. Remaining unseen mattered more than being alive. Medical explanations stayed minimal, designed to avoid external interest. Her condition existed officially between outcomes, neither confirmed nor denied. Recovery required silence, cooperation, and patience. She accepted all three without hesitation. Visibility had nearly cost her everything. Time alone restructured her understanding faster than any comfort could. She replayed events without emotion, analyzing sequence and intent. Love dissolved completely, leaving only factual assessment behind. She identified where trust became leverage and affection became access. Every compromise gained new definition under scrutiny. There was no grief left to process, only information to organize. Survival reframed her identity as temporary and strategic. The person she was no longer served the reality she faced. Reinvention became necessary, not symbolic. Remaining unchanged would guarantee eventual erasure. The world above continued assuming finality, which gave her space to plan. Absence created freedom no presence could offer. She watched from distance, learning how thoroughly he had settled. Confidence had returned to his movements, confirming his belief in closure. That certainty made him predictable. Predictability is vulnerability when someone observes patiently. She understood revenge would require precision, not exposure. Impulse would destroy what silence preserved. For now, existence meant preparation, not confrontation. Her rebirth began as discipline rather than declaration. He adjusted easily to life without interruption, convinced the past had sealed itself. Comfort returned, reinforced by routine success and the absence of challenge. Public sympathy had faded into quiet respect, leaving him unexamined. He believed closure was permanent once attention disappeared. That belief allowed arrogance to replace caution. Safeguards relaxed, habits repeated, and discretion softened gradually. He spoke freely again, trusting silence as proof of safety. Confidence restored his sense of control completely. What he failed to notice was how little he needed to change. His downfall would not require disruption, only observation. She studied him through records rather than proximity, preferring distance over risk. Digital trails told stories behavior never concealed. Patterns emerged where emotion once distracted her attention. Transactions revealed motives previously disguised as generosity. Legal structures explained decisions once framed as love. Everything he did followed logic, not passion. That logic could be mapped, anticipated, and eventually redirected. She cataloged weaknesses without urgency or emotion. Understanding replaced anger as her primary resource. Knowledge transformed memory into leverage. Revenge reshaped itself into strategy instead of reaction. She abandoned the idea of confrontation entirely. Justice required patience, not satisfaction. Every step forward demanded she remain invisible. Identity became fluid, defined by function rather than history. She learned restraint by necessity, not philosophy. Silence became active participation in her own return. She resisted the urge to feel prematurely victorious. Nothing had changed externally yet, and that mattered. Premature action would collapse everything. The world remained convinced the story was finished, which preserved her advantage. Time worked differently when no one was waiting. She allowed months to pass without urgency. Preparation matured slowly, layered deliberately. Each decision aligned with a long horizon rather than relief. She was no longer rebuilding a life, but constructing an outcome. The man who believed himself safe remained entirely unaware. That ignorance sustained the imbalance she intended to correct. Her absence continued protecting her more effectively than presence ever had. The descent toward consequence had already begun. She returned to herself through discipline rather than emotion or reflection. Strength rebuilt through routine, repetition, and deliberate emotional containment. There was no need to forgive, only to understand fully and precisely. She reframed survival as responsibility, not fortune or exception. What remained unfinished demanded completion through method, not feeling. Her identity detached from history, reshaped around capability and intent. Revenge no longer felt personal, it felt corrective. Justice required clarity, not hatred. The past stopped hurting once it stopped confusing her. Understanding replaced suffering as the dominant force. She began reconstructing her professional life quietly and legally. Credentials were verified, records restored, and timelines corrected internally. Knowledge returned sharper, unburdened by emotional interference. She studied law not as theory, but as mechanism and leverage. Cases once abstract now carried structural meaning and consequence. She saw how truth could exist, yet remain unacknowledged without strategy. Power operated through procedure, not morality. That realization changed how she viewed accountability. Winning would require patience embedded inside legitimacy. She prepared to operate within systems rather than against them. Her approach evolved into precision disguised as normalcy. She avoided dramatic shifts that might attract curiosity. Every step forward appeared incidental, unremarkable, forgettable. Silence protected progress more effectively than secrecy ever could. She learned to let time pass without anxiety. Urgency was replaced by inevitability. Control emerged from consistency rather than force. She stopped imagining outcomes and focused on alignment. When preparation feels quiet, it is often nearly complete. Transformation finalized itself through restraint. What she became no longer sought validation or acknowledgement. Rebirth did not announce itself through confrontation or exposure. It solidified internally, unseen and irreversible. The woman he believed destroyed no longer existed. What replaced her was structurally stronger and strategically invisible. She carried no desire to be understood. Her return would not ask permission. Justice was no longer emotional, but procedural. Timing mattered more than revenge itself. The moment would arrive when resistance no longer mattered. She positioned herself close enough to influence outcomes without revealing origin or intent. Legal processes invited participation quietly, never questioning qualified involvement. She entered systems that once erased her, now equipped to navigate them fully. Every action aligned with established protocol, leaving no trace of manipulation. Documents reopened pathways previously closed through assumption and neglect. Facts resurfaced naturally when guided by correct procedure. What had been dismissed as settled re-entered review through legitimate channels. No accusation was made directly. Questions alone were sufficient. Pressure built invisibly where confidence once rested. Justice advanced, disguised as routine administration. He noticed change only when certainty began to fracture. Requests arrived unexpectedly, framed as verification rather than challenge. Timelines required clarification he had never rehearsed consistently. Small inconsistencies attracted attention once patterns were revisited. What once seemed irrelevant now demanded explanation. Confidence faltered as certainty lost its foundation. He responded defensively, revealing urgency without understanding its source. Systems do not need emotion to apply consequence. They only require exposure to contradiction. His control weakened precisely because it relied on closure remaining unquestioned. Reputation eroded subtly before collapse became visible. Whispers replaced trust, and distance replaced assumption. Professional relationships cooled without confrontation or announcement. Support withdrew quietly once doubt entered the narrative. He attempted correction too late, mistaking reaction for control. What he had built depended entirely on silence. Silence no longer protected him. He faced consequences without recognizing her presence behind them. Revenge succeeded because it never revealed its architect. Justice does not require recognition to function. When resolution arrived, it did not feel triumphant or celebratory. There was no confrontation, confession, or dramatic acknowledgement. The outcome closed itself through established conclusion. She observed finality without satisfaction or regret. Completion replaced anticipation. What had been taken was not returned, but imbalance was corrected. Her life moved forward without reference to his downfall. Rebirth concluded not in victory, but in freedom. She exited the system the same way she entered it. Invisible, complete, and finished. She no longer measured progress by visible milestones or external confirmation. Transformation completed itself internally long before outcomes appeared externally. Patience became instinctive rather than forced, replacing urgency entirely. She understood timing as leverage, not delay. Every system moves slower than emotion, but faster than resistance. By aligning with process, she eliminated the need for confrontation. Control returned quietly through understanding rather than dominance. Her focus remained narrow, deliberate, and disciplined. Nothing distracted her from execution once alignment was achieved. She waited without doubt because preparation had removed uncertainty. Her presence within the system remained indistinguishable from any other professional role. No trace of personal history influenced her decisions or posture. Neutrality protected her more effectively than secrecy ever could. She followed rules precisely, knowing structure rewards consistency. Every motion appeared ordinary, routine, and compliant. Nothing suggested motive beyond responsibility and competence. That invisibility granted access without suspicion. She learned that power flows toward those who appear least invested. Emotionless precision produced irreversible momentum. Transformation matured fully through restraint. What once felt like loss no longer defined her internal narrative. Memory existed without weight, reference without attachment. The past had lost authority over her present decisions. She neither sought forgiveness nor carried resentment. Freedom emerged from emotional neutrality rather than resolution. Her identity stabilized independently of outcome. Revenge ceased being a desire and became a completed process. Nothing remained unfinished internally. Completion existed before final consequence arrived. That readiness made justice inevitable rather than satisfying. She did not imagine his reaction or anticipate acknowledgement. Expectation would have reintroduced vulnerability unnecessarily. She released the need to witness collapse directly. Detachment ensured outcome could not affect her stability. Transformation finalized as self-containment rather than empowerment. She required nothing from him or the world. The system would conclude naturally without intervention. Her role had already ended before the ending arrived. Freedom existed prior to closure. That was the true rebirth. The final consequences unfolded without spectacle, exactly as systems prefer to operate. Findings reached conclusions through documentation rather than testimony or confrontation. Decisions were issued formally, grounded in evidence that required no emotional framing. Responsibility attached itself where it always belonged, without announcement or debate. What once appeared ambiguous resolved into clarity through accumulated detail. The outcome arrived as procedure completed, not as punishment delivered. He faced results without an enemy to confront or accuse. The system closed around him with calm indifference. Justice does not announce victory, it finalizes imbalance. The story ended where accountability finally began. She observed none of it directly, choosing distance over validation. Closure did not require witnessing consequence to feel complete. Her role had concluded long before results became public. Detachment preserved what transformation had secured internally. She carried no desire to explain, justify, or be recognized. What mattered had already been corrected structurally. The past lost relevance once it lost power. Freedom does not depend on acknowledgement from those who caused harm. It exists independently of their awareness. She stepped fully beyond the story without looking back. Life resumed without reference to what had been taken or proven. Her future no longer organized itself around survival or reaction. Stability returned as choice rather than recovery. Identity settled into something quieter and stronger than before. She trusted herself without needing external confirmation. Love, when it returned, would no longer confuse control with care. Boundaries became instinct rather than defense. What once nearly erased her refined her judgment permanently. Nothing about her strength required explanation. She moved forward unburdened by the need to revisit endings. Justice completed itself without restoring what was lost. It did not offer compensation, apology, or emotional symmetry. What it provided was finality without distortion. Balance does not recreate the past. It prevents repetition. Her rebirth was never about revenge alone. It was about removing his influence from her future entirely. That separation held more power than punishment ever could. She lived without fear of recurrence. The story closed without echo or continuation. Some endings are strongest because they remain quiet.